The Shastras would try to explain the emergence and proliferation of numerous jatis by the theory of marriages among unequal Varnas, which figures in the texts as mixed marriages leading to the advent of mixed or Mishra jatis. Perhaps this is only a version of the emergence of jatis through the study of normative treatises. For a more in-depth understanding of this phenomena, one has to take into account the sociological tool of M.N. Srinivas, who speaks of the method of Sanskritization, and also the very influential theory of anthropologist Nirmal Kumar Bose, who spoke of Hindu methods of tribal absorption. The other interesting point is, even in the Shastras, the image of an immutable social structure may not always stand scrutiny. Take, for example, it is always stated that the lowest of the social orders, that is the Shudra, his function is merely to serve the three upper Varnas. That is, the Shudra has no other occupation. Yet, in the Arthashastra, indeed one of the normative treatises, very clearly the Shudra is indicated as a cultivator or Karshaka. So, the Arthashastra gives a picture quite different from the normally given image of the Shudra in other texts. Similarly, if one looks at the various types of Buddhists and Jaina texts, both canonical and non-canonical, as Narendra Wagle, Uma Chakravarti have illustrated, then there were many groups that strongly questioned the efficacy of the Varna norm, and in fact very strongly questioned the ritual supremacy of the priestly community, that is the Brahmanas. Similarly, a study of inscriptions on the question of social groups and the hierarchic position of social groups would indicate perhaps something else. While in the Brahmanical treatises, the determination of one's social status rests very strongly on the question of birth and heredity of occupation, and therefore the taboos on intermarriage. If one looks at large number of inscriptions recording donations to Buddhist monasteries and Buddhist stupas by a wide variety of people, there one comes across a peculiar phenomenon that in these inscriptions the donors, except when they were Brahmanas, rarely referred to their jati position. They always indicated their occupational character. So, in the inscriptions which record the actual act of donation, occupation is in fact no less an important marker of one's social position vis-a-vis one's birth. Actually, there is hardly a reference to one's jati position in these donative records found from, say, Sanchi or Bharhut, or a large number of such Buddhist chaityas and stupa sites in Western Deccan. Now, these are telling different versions of ancient society available by a study of different types of sources. Similarly, if one looks at the traditional description of Indian society through the Varna Jati structure, one may tend to give an ideal life in the society divided on the Varna structure. The Varna structure, seen through the prism of merely prescriptive normative treatise would indicate that the Varna structure is always the major reference point. The Varna order is only an ideal order. The actual scenario is the society was divided into numerous jatis or castes. And if one looks at the works of historians like K.P. Jaiswal, R.K. Mukherjee, R.C. Majumdar, who contributed a lot to the understanding of early Indian society and politics, through the study of these voluminous Shastras, they tended to give a picture that though the Varna society was a divided one, it was also based on mutual cooperation, and it was a peaceful coexistence of different Varnas. Yet the study of other kinds of sources, even Brahmanical sources, would indicate that there were very sharp social differentiation, inequalities among different social groups, and lower the social order, greater was the disability imposed on them. This is how D.D. Kosambi, R.S. Sharma indicated how from 600 to 1300 of the Christian era, there emerged a large number of jatis, most of which were seen as impure, as being burdened with various types of ritual impurities. They were seen as pollution, and in fact that is how the worst aspect of Indian Varna Jati divided social structure, that is the custom of untouchability, ausprishyata, looms large in this text. It is very difficult not to see the obvious differentiation, very sharp inequalities and ostracization against the lower social groups through the custom of ausprishyata. Even a visitor from elsewhere like Farsian in 5th century AD did not fail to notice that the Chandalas had to make sounds as they approached a settled society. This was a kind of scenario that is available through a study of accounts of a Chinese Buddhist pilgrim. The other interesting part of the society revolves around the question of women. A famous historian of the 1930s and 40s, A.S. Altekar, by studying the voluminous literary texts, indicated that Indian women had a pretty honorable position in society and family till perhaps 1300 AD, and perhaps with the arrival of the Turkish ruling group, then the position of women in early Indian society began to deteriorate. Now, very rigorous analysis of different types of normative as well as literary texts by Kumkum Rai, by Uma Chakravarti, suggests that the basic social structure of Indian family life was patriarchal and patrilineal, and the position of the daughter as an unmarried girl child in the parental family or as wife in the husband's family was always secondary to the position of the male members, and the position of women was very often discriminated against vis-a-vis the other male members. In a society where the birth of a male child was always favored in the Shastras and in other kinds of literature more than that of a daughter, there can be very little scope of an honorable and esteemed position of women in early Indian social structure and family structure. These scholars have also pointed out that many of the literary texts, particularly the Shastras, do accord esteemed position to the mother in the family. But they have also tried to explore the sources and analyze the sources, and therefore ask a very pertinent question: whose mother? The mother of a son and the mother of a daughter have been given completely different, treated from completely different attitude in the ancient Indian treatises. So it is not merely the sources or the references to women from different sources that is being called by historians, but they try to situate those statements from sources in the context of the overall condition of the society. That is the new methodology which is emerging in recent historiography and approach to sources. Take for example the work of Vijaya Ramaswamy, who has analyzed a vast body of Tamil devotional literature, indicating how intense devotion led a number of women devotees to defy many social norms, many sacred norms of domesticity, which they challenged through their devotion to their favorite god or goddess. That is, even the bhakti texts give an indication how intense devotion, the rise of sectarian devotional cults, the bhakti cults, paved a way for at least some women to defy established social norms and question the supremacy of patriarchal tradition. Like the great Satavahana ruler Gautami Putra Satakarni, because his mother is Gautami, it gives a picture of quite a complex society where inheritance goes from father to son or daughter, but naming pattern is from mother to son. This is a typical feature of the Deccan society not encountered in North India. In this way, we find how different types of texts and inscriptions can give different types of images of Indian society, and therefore Indian society cannot be seen as merely inflexible, changeless over millennia. This is the major contribution of historians of recent times. They have tried to give an image of the ability of Indian society to change, perhaps change slowly, but there is a dynamics in the social life. Similarly, if we look at the economic institutions, the study of, once again, normative treatises, the study of Buddhist texts, study of inscriptions, study of accounts of travelers would indicate that the very basis of traditional Indian economy was agriculture, as it still now is. And merely it cannot be appreciated through the study of voluminous Shastras. One of the very best images of the quintessential and ubiquitous peasant in Indian history looms large in a sculpture from Gandhara. It's a sculpture of the Buddha. At the pedestal of the sculpture is shown the quintessential Indian farmer pushing a pair of oxen with a plough. Similarly, archaeological excavations, say from Taxila or Sanchi, have unearthed agricultural implements, including the use of iron plowshare and iron agricultural tools, sickles, axes, adzes. Here we can profitably utilize field archaeological material, art historical visual material with the description available in the texts. In the study of various types of crafts and handicrafts, small scale industries, one can profitably draw very heavily from epigraphic documentation and which has been done by a large number of scholars. If, take for example, we try to put in here the large body of archaeological materials, then one sees how actual specimens of crafts production become visible. Say, the use of iron technology that began to be visible from 700 BCE, 600 BCE, from a large number of iron tools found from excavations not only in Ganga Valley but also in some parts of peninsular India. Similarly, say the work of the jeweler, often figuring in classical Sanskrit text under the heading of the work of the Manikara, looms large in archaeological contexts when we find the actual specimen of beads made of semi-precious or precious stones. How a new craft activity can lead to a change in the life of the people can be seen, for example, say at two places. One, say in western part of present-day Tamil Nadu, Kodumanal. This was a site which is essentially a craft center, and Kodumanal is not known from any other sources except field archaeological materials. On the other hand, around say early 7th century, an inscription from Rajasthan indicates that how the discovery of a mine led to the opening up of new avenues of occupation for the people at a place called Aranya Kupagiri. Words like Aranya and Giri suggests that it was possibly a hilly and forested terrain where the opening up of a mine offers new economic activities for the people there. Now, this is how the sources can be utilized to give glimpses of different types of crafts activities. Similarly, the very long held notion that Indians were essentially agriculturists and rarely took to trade, especially long distance seaborne commerce, is now open to question by a rigorous analysis of different types of sources. Yes, in the Brahmanical normative treatises, the images one did not normally take to crossing of the sea because sea is considered as a pollutant to the voyager. Yet, if we take into account how Indian scripts, Indian religions, different Indian religions, Indian language, and even some of the Brahmanas appeared in Southeast Asia, both mainland Southeast Asia and maritime Southeast Asia, one has to ask, how did they reach to these distant destinations? Obviously, by crossing the Bay of Bengal. And that immediately opens up a critical approach to the Shastric injunction on the against the crossing of the sea, which is normally brought in the category of Kalivarjya, that is forbidden acts in the terrible Kali age. Similarly, say in the 1950s, 1960s, many of them very great historians tried to write the history of India's commerce with the Roman Empire. The main bulk of evidence was culled from a large variety of Greek and Latin texts, like the texts of Orion, Diodorus, Strabo, Pliny, Ptolemy, and obviously the very famous Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, written by an anonymous Greek shipper. Now, the picture is much more interesting as historians of the same subject would like to draw upon and very heavily upon field archaeological explored and excavated materials, say from the excavation at Berenike in the Red Sea area, which has yielded not only many Roman artifacts but also a number of Indian artifacts. Obviously, these Indian artifacts reached the very famous port of Berenike by way of maritime commerce. Similarly, the recent excavations at Pattanam in Kerala, close to Cranganore, indicates that this is the site of the celebrated port of Muziris, celebrated in classical literature. Now, with the availability of the archaeological materials from Pattanam, one can with some degree of certainty pinpoint the actual location of the great port of Muziris, which is also known in Tamil Sangam texts as Muchiripattanam. Similarly, the port of Arikamedu, famous in the texts of Ptolemy and also Periplus of the Erythraean Sea as Poduke, we now know that how this area had a very long history, possibly from 200 BC, known from excavations and known from a particular type of pottery, and how Roman or Mediterranean pottery began to reach this particular port. One interesting part of the history of trade in this subcontinent comes, say, from the study of inscriptions. In an inscription of 466 AD from the Ganga Yamuna Doab area in North India, we find there were two merchant brothers who made some donations to a sun temple. How did the two merchant brothers identify themselves? They give their name but also tell themselves as Kshatriya Vanik, that is, merchants belonging to Kshatriya caste. Now, how this is possible according to the Brahmanical norms? A Kshatriya cannot be a Vanik normally cannot aspire for the Kshatriya status. Yet, this exactly had happened, and this was not obviously an act bringing impurity. So, here is something which is actually happening in life, and it is to be judged in terms of the prescriptions laid down in the Shastras. In recent times, understanding of the early Indian merchants and the mercantile activities can be seen by a study of many letters of Jewish merchants. Many of them came to India between 11th and 13th century. Some of them actually did reside in some of the South Indian port towns. These letters were written by merchants. So here we can hear actually the voices of the merchants, the actual players in the arena of commerce. This kind of sources in fact throw interesting light on the price of commodities, the fluctuating demand of a particular commodity in different types of markets. The merchant in early India is not merely an adjunct to the mainstream agrarian society. Sometimes the merchants can appear as the hero of a text. Let us take, for example, the instance of the very famous Sanskrit drama Mritchakatikam of Shudraka, where the hero is Charudatta, who was a Brahmana by birth but functioned as a Sartava or a merchant. In an earlier lecture, we spoke of Charitas, Harsha Charita or Ramacharitam, highlighting the glorious career and life of rulers. The merchants themselves could be also such heroes of Charita type of texts. We know of an actual historical merchant, Jagadu, who figures in a text called Jagadu Charita of 12th, 13th century from Gujarat. Similarly, the life history of a well-known merchant, Vastupala, figures in a text called Vastupala Mahatmyam. once again coming from Gujarat. So the study of different types of sources can give us is this, that early Indian social and economic life and institutions were neither static nor undifferentiated. Both had enough elements of change, capacity to change, and obviously had the elements of a dynamic way of life.